Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Talking Time Let's Play for Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. I am McDole, and doing this voiceover commentary with a couple of my fellow Raider peoples. Please introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm Gare. I run the Static. I run the free company. You probably heard me in a previous video. And
Yep.
actually did Final Coil when it was current content back in the day.
As you'll
And I,
see, sorry, I was going to say as you'll see momentarily, but Mighty Blue.
yeah, I'm Mighty Blue, fellow raider, and I'm also one of the old grognards who did Final Coil when it was new and relevant.
And Mighty Blue and Gare are both super lore nerds, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, because this is the end of Final Coil. So what we're seeing here is some of the is so when we left off, Louisoix was revealed to be still alive, one, and two, under Bahamut's influence. Like, he was tempered,
Yeah.
and that
He.
blew
Sorry.
everyone's mind. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, I remember when we were progging this. Our sister Static had actually just cleared it like a day before us, and they like, no, you don't spoil yourself. Don't look on YouTube. Just wait and just you're almost there. It's worth it. Make sure you don't spoil yourself on what happens. Like everyone had kind of a vague idea, that they knew Phoenix was Louis Swab, but like everything else. And so when you actually cleared that fight, 11 T11, it was amazing. Like that was something that only other Savage Raiders, even though there wasn't any Savage versus normal at the time, anyone who did Coil, who did, the hard rating, they're the ones who got to see it.
Mm-hmm.
I also felt it was a big misstep overall, even though it was super cool when I did it, because it was like, it was such an important part of the lore, as,
Yeah, because
that
this raid series as a whole is a coda for 1.x.
yes, but also it's also like a coda for just a Realm Reborn in general, because even if you didn't play 1.0, I didn't actually play 1.0, all you hear about when you first start playing, um, in a Realm Reborn itself is that Bahamut, the calamity, the calamity, the calamity. And so this is kind of like, even if you didn't play 1.0, it's still a really important amount of information and lore that shaped Eorzea and the rest of, the star
Mm-hmm.
irrecoverably. Like that was, so it's a big mystery, like how it happened, how did we survive, how did Eorzea survive? Like Bahamut just fucking flared everyone, mega flared everyone to death, giga flare. So how did this all happen? And so that video was so important to the story overall that Square Enix actually released it about 6 months before. It was pretty much along the same time where like we got the last final. It was 6 months before Heavensward dropped. They actually just released it on YouTube and told people to watch it because that's how important it was. You didn't get Louis Sua's voiceover. Like the one thing about Coil that I always really liked was that it was all voiced,
Mm-hmm.
and I really am not happy that they've never voiced another set of raids since then. It really
Mm-hmm.
added to to the drama, to the seriousness, and helped really bring the story along. But so you didn't get Louis Wall's voiced cutscene prior to the FMV, so there was still something for people who had done Coil overall. But I always thought it was a misstep that people just, such an important part of how are we still here? Like how did Eorzea survive? Was just lost on most of the population. So
Yeah. No, you're right, and that's one of the things that they sought to correct when we go into Heavensward. Eventually, you'll see that rating is basically split into two difficulties. You have the normal, which is kind of yeah, I loathe to say the word casual, but it's very simple pick up and play. You can get through it with very little difficulty, and you still get all the story stuff out of it.
yeah, I
And
mean,
then Savage is where you get your really challenging stuff.
I wouldn't even say like casual is not a dirty word. It is casual play, but there's nothing wrong with that. One of the things they actually said they regretted when they were unveiling Heavensward for the first time was that they regretted that the story is locked behind, like, a much higher difficulty than anyone ever would have faced before. If they were, because they recognized, like, people had been asking for a story version of Coil, and while they didn't do that, they said that, we took that feedback specifically because, yeah, this game is all about the story. Even a lot of the hardcore raiders you see are really invested in the story. It's actually pretty rare, even among like Savage or Ultimate Raiders, that they skipped all the cutscenes. Like that's one of the biggest draws, in the fact that pretty much every demographic, slice of every demographic, is invested in the story. It was a big mistake, and they recognized that. So that's why they went, with Heaven's Word onwards, with the Alexander, and then the Omega, and then the Eden raids. There's always a normal version, and I think they did a really good job delineating that, because in Final Fantasy XIV, the other joke is that it's all about glamour. So people were like, oh well, it's not worth. The story was the reward. I'm like, no, they made it so that you could have dyeable gear, and that dyeable gear means it's a prestige item, and it really has worked very well for that, even though they have this kind of vertical tiering, such that a new raid cycle begins and all your old raid gear is actually worse than the new crafted gear or the new normal raid gear. So I think they did a really good balance that way.
So here we are, confronting Louisoix finally, and Alphino is here, and he's already kind of surmised of what actually happened, and this is basically Louisoix confirming his suspicions. Did I leave? Oh, you know what? I didn't do that because Square Enix, like you said, uploaded the video that has the pre-rendered movie of what happened. So if you want to, you can go into the. I think I've put link. It's going to be linked somewhere up thread if you haven't looked at it. Highly recommend you do, because it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things here is that the other really important thing about Coil in general is that it's your first introduction to Alice. If you remember, if you've been following along in this video series and in the thread, the Let's Play thread, Alice actually left Alphino and you right after the level 15 listen to all the speeches thing, because she's like, this is bullshit, I'm gonna go do shit that needs to be done, because she Alice herself was like, I don't know what happened to my grandfather. I mean, yeah, he died, but how is Eorzea still here? And so this is your journey with her, and it actually affects dialogue choices, or rather dialogue that's displayed to you in Heaven's Word when she comes back.
Yes, because spoiler alert, she's gonna leave at the end of this story, but she's doing it kind of like as a journey of self-discovery, because Louisoix here tells her and Alphino to find out, to seek out for themselves what they're fighting for, rather than just follow along in his footsteps, kind of a thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess more specifically, how can you, help the world? Why are you fighting for the world? What's your specific reason? And that is something that Alice has to go through. But it was the reason why I wanted to try and get people through Coil, even if they didn't do all the individual turns at the time, was because I felt it was that important that when Alice, meets you again, she's not like, who's this bozo? I mean, she's not quite like that. She's heard about the Warrior of Lights,
through Alphino,
through Alphino, and just in general, but she's a little skeptical in her dialogue if you haven't done Coil. Whereas if you've done Coil, she wants to talk to you specifically. She knows who you are. She knows she can rely on you, and she knows that you can keep a secret, all that stuff, because nobody, we specifically in the storyline, nobody reveals that Phoenix was the reason why Eorzea not only survived, but for the whole map redo, because I don't know if I'm sure you must have talked about previously, in 1.0 it was just copy pasted everything everywhere. And I know Mighty Blue actually played a bit of 1.0, and can probably confirm how bad, especially the Black Shroud was. I've seen that map and I just went, no, I would just close the map and just close the game and never come back.
There's multiple vertical levels with no jumping.
Yep. And so, like, how did the old map become the, the new maps remade for A Realm Reborn? And it's specifically because of Phoenix, because he basically casts, resurrection and, prevents, make sure Bahamut's ether, and everything goes back into, the planet. So it's a bit of a big deal. Oh, Mighty Blue, you should probably talk some more. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep filling the air with nonsense.
Yeah, it's also important to note that this juncture, we don't really know the mechanics of how primals work. I mean, general sense, sure, prayer, crystals, you get a primal, but the third coil basically outlines a lot of the subtler mechanics behind primal summoning and primal creation that don't really get touched on much until several expansion packs later, when primals or similar things become more relevant to the main story again. So it's sort of neat that they've managed to keep things pretty consistent as far as their internal mythology and world mechanics go.
Yeah, no, they've always been really good about that. Anything that's kind of been retconned has mostly just been stuff from 1.0, and even then there's a surprising amount of stuff that has come through unscathed, or rather, like, it was part of their design doc, I guess, from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like, so this primal summoning here, like, it's not just crystals, it's not just ether, it's also when you do turn 8, Alice is just absolutely horrified when she, sees all of the creatures in the Allagan, stasis, and then as we get closer, she realizes that there's a lot of those creatures in stasis are actually dragons who are praying for Bahamut to deliver them. And that's why his, it outlines how barbaric the Allagons were. Because until you really do Coil, or later in different expansions, Allag is just kind of like, hey, this is kind of cool.
Ancient
this is like
Magitech.
ancient magic tech and magic and shit, yo. The ancients are powerful.
And Final Fantasy 13 models.
Yeah, and it's not really until World of Darkness and Coil where you start to see, like, even in World of Darkness, the third of the Crystal Tower raids, it's like, okay, yeah, I guess they were kind of bad, but it was Final Coil and Second Coil that really outlined just how horrible Allag was. There's no such thing as a good empire, and Allag was absolutely horrible. This gets talked about a lot more in Heaven's Word.
And also Shadowbringers.
And especially Shadowbringers, but we're not going to talk about that right now because that would be huge spoilers.
Yeah, it starts setting up some rather uncomfortable parallels between ancient Allag and Garlemald, and the way Garlemald has treated its conquered territories, and then things will spill out further as you get more current events through some of Heaven's Word's patch content, and then Stormblood and all that. It's a real surprise to see an MMO take story this seriously, because remember, this is only like a year or two into the rebirth of 14 at this point, and sure, we were getting expansion pack, but the leveling story was sort of so-so, and then Coil story is pretty good, and you start wondering, well, is it going to be more like Coil story, or is it going to be more like the the original leveling story? And there's still at this point that real tension between, is this going to last more than a basic expansion pack before it gets quietly mothballed still.
So
I mean,
so,
that was that was
Oh, go
something I
ahead, Gare.
remember very. Sorry, McDonald. No, I just wanted to say that was actually a really big topic among Final Fantasy XIV players back then. Was, well, is Heavensward going to be like Coil? They're saying they're going to be doing more of the story, or is it going to be more like slightly more generic Final Fantasy XIV and Realm Reborn? And so people were saying, well, this is like kind of using 1.0 story stuff too, and it's not that long of a series in terms of story. Like, you got story in between everything, of course, but it wasn't like this was like a huge expand. It's not like it's a full expansion or like a leveling set of stories. And even though the voice acting here was about the same as what you would see in A Realm Reborn otherwise, people are like, well, the voice acting is still not that great and stuff. And so when we get to Heavensward, there's just this big improvement, because they changed. I mean, first of all, they had a budget, especially in English, to go ahead and hire another studio. There's going to be a big voice change for anyone who is who's been following along. They went to a new voice studio. It's actually the ones that it's done stuff like Xenoblade Chronicles, and so you'll actually hear some people. You'll go, oh, that's Shulk, or etc. and so forth. I like to make a joke that there was that when the video came out for Definitive Edition. I'm like, oh, I guess it's just Alphino playing D&D with his buddies and getting really frustrated because it's rain time. No, it's not. Can you stop fucking making me have to roll initiative? But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So you might notice a complete change in screen layout. Well, that's because when I did the video on Satsunswees, it was a total curb stomp because everybody was synced up to level 80. So what I've done here is I've actually went back and grabbed footage from Gare's static back in the day, so where the level cap was 50, and you guys are clearing Bahamut for the first time here. So
yep, that was when I was a warrior still.
Yep.
So Shadowbringers, I was basically a warrior full time. Yeah, so you can see you can see the damage in the corner there. So right now, so you can see that Pokeball, Poke, who's Pokebaus later on, and Rhea are doing about 600 points of damage per second, and that was a lot back then. Now it's like 25k if you're like a higher DPS, like a Samurai or Black Mage or whatever.
Yeah, Mighty Blue and Cider are usually hitting somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30k on openers.
Yeah. So yeah, they're doing a big stat squish actually for Endwalker, which is necessary because they were starting to run into overflow issues, which I don't mind. But yeah, no, like it was definitely a different time in terms of rotations, especially were very simple compared to now. Mm-hmm. And like the mechanics in Final Coil are fairly, I want to say they're on par with the first set of Heavensward raids in general. Maybe a little bit more mechanic intensive for certain fights, but we still haven't actually seen the kind of design philosophy that will bloom in Final Fantasy XIV raids. Things are still fairly, easygoing. I know we're talking about lore, but it's just, watching and remembering all the stuff we had to do.
The fight design is still pretty simple. It's just the number tuning that makes it hard, really, because when you get right down to it, a lot of the Coil fights are basically on the level of your average later expansion pack primal fight or one of the alliance bosses.
I'd say that they're. I mean, 9 was not. 9 was definitely what I would call is the equivalent of like the modern Savage raids for sure.
Yeah. Nail is a crotch punch if you're not paying attention.
Sure, yeah. But that's the capstone fight, and those traditionally are a little bit more complex than.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of Bahamut himself. He's easier than Nail, definitely less complex. It is just big numbers going in and numbers going out in terms of what's required for mitigation. You also have to remember at this point we didn't have a lot of first of all, there were no roll abilities, so things like reprisal didn't exist. Al didn't even have Divine Veil. There was no real party-wide mitigation other than like bards having their stuff and like healers having shields. So, you know, at this point in time, it's like tanks kind of just took care of themselves. They didn't have a lot of the extra responsibilities that they have now, and positioning was a lot easier then, as well, because it was just kind of drag them to one spot. You don't really have to keep moving them, whereas now you have to do that. But what you can see here is that, you know, so these Shadows of Mericidia were actually, they first showed up in turn 9, and it's all part of the whole, you know, worshipping this Bahamut as a primal, as an icon. And, you know, his... Like, the fact, like, this Bahamut is not the one that existed before. This was, you know, this was one that was, you know, summoned, or, you know, like, just like a primal. And they don't really talk about the difference between icons, and just regular ass primals until later. And so, you know, right now everyone just thinks that's just the Allegon word for a primal. And of course, you know, Garlemald, much like, you know, modern colonial states, you know, basically the Western world, who are all like attempting to be, you know, the true successors to Rome. You know, Garlemald has marked themselves as the successors to Allag, and so that opens up a whole bunch of possibilities. Speaking of colonialism, like, the one thing I actually really like about 14 is that it examines colonialism pretty well, even from the perspective, especially from the perspective of the Eorzean city-states, in that the city-states are the aggressors overall when it comes to their struggles with the quote-unquote beast tribes, which are actually, it's a racial name, it's like a racist name that Ul'dah came up with. Before that, they were just, you know, every different tribe was just part of the spoken. They were not referred to as beast tribes in a derogatory manner.
So
and the fact that, sorry.
Yeah, you see, like, Y'shtola was calling Merlrub out for her,
yeah,
dunking on the kobolds and whatnot.
Yeah, for breaking the treaty. In fact, it was Limsa that broke the treaty with the kobolds in the first place. And I saw, you know, as an anthropologist, and, you know, as a linguist, you know, who's involved with things like colonialism and, you know, reclaiming, you know, indigenous language and stuff and helping it thrive again, seeing a game outwardly say, no, you fuckers, that, you know, we're gonna help you, but you fucked up. This is the reason why this keeps happening, is because you keep breaking treaties, because you keep attacking them. They're trying to defend themselves. What, you do the same goddamn thing. And that was the first time I went, oh wow, this, because I was expecting, I played a little bit of 11, and I played some WoW, and it's just, there's a whole lot of unexamined colonialism in those games, and racism, and especially in 11, where it was like, literally, the big beast tribes are literally subhuman. And I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to like this game, because, oh god, there's more beast tribes. But I was pleasantly surprised, to say the least, and this kind of, you know, gentle touch, and the fact that we're willing to examine some really deep themes, ones that are plaguing us today in society, is both welcome and is really refreshing on my part, for myself.
Yeah, and I've alluded to this a little bit in some of the MSQ updates you might have read before about the unrest in Ul'dah and that kind of stuff. But anyway, yeah, no. This part of the Bahamut fight is basically, we're not talking about mechanics, because it's all ads, basically.
Yeah, and it was a real DPS check back in the day. Like, we always had very good DPS in our group, in general. I mean, our healers are not super great. Sheer was never really that great with damage. But, like, in general, we were, you know, doing really well. And, like, it was a challenge to prog this, just for the amount of numbers, because all these things have to die at a certain point in time, or they heal each other, or we get overwhelmed, and things like having to make sure, because I don't know if you saw a little bit earlier, but when Cognac was come down and she dropped a giant fucking Neuralink, and so you have to stand in that, you have to use tank LB3, that's the only way to survive Giga Flare.
Yeah, and we'll see that kind of stuff coming up later as well in future raids.
Tanks get one fight where they have to use the LB3 per expansion. No more.
I don't remember them having to do it like we used it as a cheese strat in I think 011S, but that was it.
You had to use it for Alex 12.
Yeah.
For more recent stuff, there's been a couple trials where you had to survive a trial ultimate.
Oh right, yeah, the
Tank
trial
LB3.
ultimate. Yeah, that was Shadowbring's. I don't think it was.
I believe for 011, Tank LB3 was soft required. You could get by over mitigating with Tank LB2, but
yeah, that was a cheese
designed
strat.
for LB3.
That was a cheese.
Well, no, I mean,
that was a cheese strat.
It was, but I mean, like, there's a lot of things you can choose within those. So this is the part, like, if you watch these things, with, so the tanks had to make sure they picked up one of those feathers. Not one of these ones, but like there's one that's going to be coming up, like a red feather, and each tank has to pick one up. And so me and Shira at this point are kind of having to hang out next to each other because we have to provoke off of each other. I actually had to use... you basically cheese all of these enormous tank busters by using a warrior and having them home gang. And Shira was able to do one hallowed ground, but fucking home gang was broken until like almost the end of Stormblood. It was basically invulnerability every few minutes. Like, it was ridiculous. They finally nerfed it to be every 4 minutes, but it's still way too quick, in my opinion. It was very good. It's very good mitigation. But you know,
They still haven't properly adjusted the fight design for all the instant healing off bubbles that don't consume MP, because that's your real fight pacers are going to be your healing output, because, you know, we can damage all day long and sit there and get hit all day long, but as long as the healers can still keep healing, you know, there's nothing to stop you outside of Heart and Rage.
which becomes very, very popular in Heavensward, and one of the things I think is especially damning in terms of rage event. Like, since Heavensward, most fights have had Heart and Rages, but especially in Gordius, it's real nasty. It was too much. I have so much to complain about when it comes to Gordius that you're gonna have to have an entire episode just dedicated to me doing that.
Yeah, I think the Elegant Node fight, Coil 2, is what scared them off of Soft and Rages, because, you know, people figured a way to cheese around it, because you could eventually just have the healers outgear the damage output.
Yeah, but even here in like a Bahamut, there is eventually a hard cast and rage, but it has a really long soft and rage in comparison to like later fights where it's very hard and dry. The one thing that you're going to see here a lot is like this is the fight that introduced Earth Shakers, and that's why they're always called Earth Shakers if you take a look at raid guides for things, even for later fights, even if they're not called Earth Shakers. They were called that here, so that's what they're called forever.
They have that unique fleur-de-lis looking thing that appears above the target, and they'll bait. You'll see where they bait the puddles in addition to a giant ass cone that they fire out. Like right here, you'll see on Garelon in the background. Oh, no, it's Twisters. Never mind.
Yeah, it's Twisters. Well, that's not exactly Twisters. Something different.
I mean, it's a tornado. It's not.
This is the first time that we really see stack markers. They change them again later on, but that's an early design for a stack marker.
Here we go. Smokey, and so he's taking these cones outward and arranging the puddles so that they're out of the way and they're not overlapping. Because if you overlap them, then you're getting hit by the puddles in addition to your own puddle, and you're going to die.
Most Earthshakers since then don't have that. They just have
the one hit.
They're just the cleave that you most will take them away. But yeah, when we finally have turn in terms of raid mechanic, they have a really good solid base of what is what. And like, you know, and they start really adding to it, and you start to see these repeated mechanics over and over again until, you know, by the time you reach Shadowbringers, even in Stormblood, there's this really highly developed raid language that helps people if you've done all the fights back in the day. And he's doing Storm Legged Flares. We won.
I think this and 9 are probably the first fights that really put any sort of emphasis on field positioning, as far as like more than just move it to one spot and then 5 minutes later you move it to another. But no, everyone else is constantly doing things like you saw the constant, the big mega flare dance where people were running in and out with different markers, and that's pretty much the first time that happened in the game.
Yeah.
Oh, carbon twine. Those things have been removed from the game since then.
Yep, you didn't originally get the whatchamacallits. You didn't get those ether tomes either. Oh, also, this is the fight where we got 6 fucking scholar books in a row, and this was before the added tokens. It sucked. This whole fucking tier, all that dropped was fucking bard gear, specifically bard fucking hats. It drove me nuts. It took forever for me to get fucking geared up. It was awful.
It's the easiest tier for me to gear.
Yeah, I wonder why. You literally got everything thrown at you every week. And we would get like multiple, like we must have had like 6 or 8 fucking bard hats on top of it too. It was ridiculous.
Well, that's the video's already over here. I can't. I have to insert a silly picture here somewhere. I don't know what I'll do with it. But anyway, thank you both.
Just splice in Ria's like pull, the one where he kills us because he did too much damage.
All right, well, I'll holler at you guys later. Thank you very much for watching, and this is probably the last time I'll do voiceover stuff for ARR because I have been I've been burned out for the last year. So as far as like creating this stuff goes, I think it was a little overambitious myself. So next time you hear my voice on one of these videos, it's gonna be in Heavensward. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll catch you guys later.
Bye.
Yep. Thanks, McDowell. Bye.
Bye.